Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the International Feature Panel. Um, the countries of France, Brazil, Germany, Latvia, and Denmark are represented in the five nominated films for Best International Feature Oscar this year. In my humble opinion, it's one of the strongest slates I can recall in a long time. Two of these films are also nominated for Best Picture, and another is also nominated for Best Animated Film, showing the strength of international cinema to continuing to cross borders and achieving global appeal. This film deal with urgent topics affecting their countries, whether it's censorship, military dictatorships, patriarchy, while also displaying a sense of hope and resilience. Despite the fact that these four films are very different stylistically, there's a lot they have in common. They have a faith in the future and in humanity as well. Director Magnus Van Horn, oops, my goodness. Director Magnus Van Horn, nominated for his film The Girl with the Needle, couldn't join us today for he's in Europe. But we have four extraordinarily talented directors with us today. Four directors that I greatly admire, and I cannot wait to speak with them. Please give a warm welcome to Jacques Audiard, Emilia Perez, thank you, Jacques, Mohammad Rasulov, the seed of the sacred fig, Walter Salas, I'm still here, and Gintz Silvalodes, Flo. So I will be speaking with each of them for about 10 minutes or so individually, and then we'll have a group discussion. And we're going to start with Gintz and the film Flow from Latvia. Let's take a quick peek at Flo. Cat is a solitary animal, but as his home is devastated by a great flood, he finds refuge on a boat populated by various species and will have to team up with them despite their differences. Flo is nominated not just for Best International Feature Film, but also for Best Animated Feature Film. Let's take a look at Flo. So glad you're here again. I've admired your work for so long, and Flo is phenomenal. One of the things that I was so moved watching Flo for the first time is that it was traveling directly to the subconscious and to the emotions, and that you were not restrained by language nor cultural barriers. The film speaks with those constrictions. Can you talk about your approach to the film?
Yeah, well, all the films I've done are without dialogue, and to me, that's not really a restriction. It's kind of liberating. It allows me to use the music and images and lights and editing in a much more expressive way. And I think I'm really kind of my first goal is to create an experience to evoke emotion rather than sending a message. It's more intuitive. There are some emotional ideas I couldn't even explain while making the film. If I could explain them, then I wouldn't need to make the film. Like by making the film, I can kind of figure out what it means to me. And I think with music, or you can convey things you can't with words. And I think just filmmaking in general is closer to music than any other art. Music doesn't need to be explained. You either feel something or you don't, and it transcends any cultural boundaries and also works for different ages. So yeah, there isn't like a spoken language, but I think filmmaking is a language, and we don't need to learn it. It's something that we can just intuit, and it can kind of uh, w- yeah, show how we are more similar than different, that we can understand stories through images. And it's like the earliest language before, I think, spoken word. We would communicate visually and through movement, and so, and yeah, like this is the international panel, and I know this was used to be like the foreign language panel, like the category. And I think, yeah, it's yeah, images are a language, so it's not foreign.
On that same vein, on following up on that, you give us no exposition in this film. You don't explain things. You just show us, and we experience the whole film. Tell us about tell us your approach to that aspect. The fact that you don't, you don't give us answers. We have to immerse ourselves in this film.
Well, we experienced this story through the cat's point of view, and I wanted to really be immersed in that point of view and not to leave it to explain what happened, because the cat doesn't know where the flood is coming from or where the humans went. And I think that's very exciting to experience something through someone else's eyes. And I think cinema is the best kind of way to do that. And I've never I'm very curious how it's like to be a cat. It's like I've never felt that, and I think you can do that in 80 minutes while watching a film. And but yeah, also like everything seems more intense and emotional when we see it from this cat's point of view. If it would be humans, like we wouldn't care about these characters as much. Like if something bad happens to a person, like no one cares. But if something bad happens to a cat or a dog, then there could be a lot of reactions. So that's we're kind of cheating a little bit, and kind of using these animals to get like a response from people. But yeah, it's very. Like it's I don't want to explain like the history of this world or whatever happened. I'm not really interested in that. I just want to focus on the characters, on their journey. And I think what I want to say about them is pretty clear and definitive, and there is a statement I'm making. But these exposition or whatever, that's not really a concern to me. I think that could only be distracting.
I adore your long takes that you do in this film. They're very deliberate. And yet there's a sense of spontaneity. But I know that everything is extremely calculated. There's almost a documentary feel to the camera work that we're discovering, and it's a very curious camera. Can you tell us about your approach?
Yeah, that's why I wanted to make you like there, it shouldn't feel like it's rigidly constructed. Instead, it should feel like it's discovered. But of course, everything is there. We don't get things for free like you would do in a documentary where you just find things. We have to design all these imperfections. We have to put them for a reason. But yeah, like the process when working in a smaller team and basically me designing the shots myself, it can be more intuitive. Like when you're working in a big team, you need to like write all the rules of how these things work, and so that everyone's working on kind of the same page. But because I'm kind of designing the shots myself, and I don't storyboard, I just kind of discover them in this virtual environment in the 3D space. So it can be more intuitive, and there are certain moments which I can't even explain. And for me, when I'm communicating with the team, sometimes it's just easier to show something rather than explaining it. And the same with music, I can't explain the emotion. If I can, someone will interpret it in a very different way because music is so subjective. So it's just easier for me to kind of sketch something out and then let other people who are smarter than me to kind of finish it and polish it. But it's kind of the best of both worlds, where it can be very hands-on and involved myself, but also very collaborative and working with these different people who specialize in their specific fields.
Having seen your previous work, including Aqua, the short film, and then previously you worked by yourself. You created You did everything by yourself. In this film, you had to learn to collaborate with a big team. I cannot help to think that this film has sort of this meta narrative that the personal story about how to work with others has has fed into the storytelling of your film. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's by design. Basically, I wanted to tell a story of me making this film, and because they say write what you know, to kind of find that authenticity and honesty, which should feel kind of not manufactured, but that feels raw. And so I tried to kind of, yeah, I'm trying to open myself up and maybe revealing something, or yeah, just saying things that maybe I don't want to share, that I'm a bit hesitant to share. That's kind of, but I think we can respond to that when you see a filmmaker who's not hiding their deepest feelings and kind of letting them out on the screen. I think that's what I want to see, not something that feels just manufactured. And so it was about kind of, well, when writing the script, I was anticipating all this conflict and difficulty. So the characters are fighting and arguing a lot, but the actual making of the film was. I was so lucky to have a great team of very supportive team, and so that's the difference. But yeah, I still didn't like know what would happen. It was while making the film I was learning this, and I'd never done this, and I had a lot of anxiety and felt an imposter syndrome because I never worked in a team, and now I'm in charge of the studio, and we have this big. Well, it's not a big budget, but for me it felt big because I worked with my first film was $40,000, so this felt much bigger. And but I think it's good that I had this kind of naivety as well going in. I didn't know how hard it would be. Had I known, I'd probably not begin working on this. So I think like being very naive and not knowing what's how difficult it is, that's a good thing.
I adore this film so much, and I adore you, Gintz. Tell us about the fact that we have a lemur, we have a cat, we have a dog, and we have a bird that they change, and then we have the capybara that doesn't change. And I see this character as an aspirational figure. He's there to teach the others to basically chill. Can you tell us about that dynamic?
Yeah, it is very aspirational. I think there's something of me in all of these characters, more the cat than anyone else. But yeah, that is my aspiration to be like the capybara, and yeah, every one of these characters, they're no heroes or villains. They're hopefully interesting and relatable, but also flawed, which makes them interesting. But the capybara is yeah, it's about funny that it always sleeps throughout this craziness happening, but it's really part of the team how every character was chosen, that they're kind of overcoming their fears or learning to accept these fears, and not running away from them, and accepting others. And the capybaras seem to be like that in real world. They're almost like the diplomats of the animal world. And so this is something that I think people connect to. Like this is something what we all need in these times.
And tell us, I've asked you this before, but I love to hear you again talk about the fact that we have the cat always moving up and wanting to get away from everything else, and then he eventually learns to join the others. Tell us about that dynamic.
Yeah, so as just like real cats do, they climb up somewhere just to run away from someone chasing them, and then they might get stuck there. And I think this is also could happen to people where there's something scary and we run away from it and we hide, and maybe we hide from the problems, but we also don't experience the joys of life. And that's what the cat does. It climbs up those towers in the end of the film, and yeah, maybe there it's safe there, but there's nothing there, and it has to leave this fantasy version of what it thinks is right, and it has to literally go back down into reality and jump into the cold water and embrace that. And yeah, that's something I really relate to. And but yeah, I think it like it's complicated. Like we want to have these characters make this difficult decisions. There are no easy answers, and sometimes they're both wrong and both right. And so hopefully, even if they do something selfish or whatever, I think we can at least understand why they do these things.
Your film has connected across the world, and people have found a lot of inspiration, a lot of lessons from watching your film. Is that something that you expected?
Well, it's hard to expect anything with films like this, where it's kind of when you're pitching something, you're asked to compare it to something else, and we try to pitch something which you haven't seen, and then it's hard to expect what would happen. And like a film from Latvia has never reached like an audience like this, so of course we couldn't expect that. And also for an independent film, so we're not trying to make like a commercial family film or whatever, but it was really a personal story, and I just tried to make something I would like to watch. It's kind of hard to make something for others. I don't. You end up kind of, it becomes very bland, I think, if you do that. So I just try to make something that I would like to watch, and hope that people have similar tastes or there's themes that they can relate to. So yeah, it's been such an incredible surprise, and we couldn't have expected this.
Last question is the fact that you do a lot of world building, and I know you've mentioned that a lot comes from your imagination, and you blend Mayan and Aztec and European landscapes as well as architecture. But I couldn't help but see Latvia landscapes and the waterways, etc. Can you tell us about blending in the the Latvia that you know and you grew up with?
Yeah, well, maybe the beginning of the film might resemble Latvia, the cat's home. We don't have these giant cat statues yet, but yeah, there's then the cat goes on this crazy global adventure, just like I am now with this film. So, but yeah, it's maybe not even the space, but even the cat's character. Maybe that's Latvian, kind of stubborn, independent, kind of introverted in some ways. But yeah, then like I think Latvians can have like a distance at first, but when you get to know them and when you become friends, you become friends for life. And so I think we tried to have that character, the cat, kind of representing that.
So you and I are going to be friends for life now.
I think so.
Yeah, excellent. Congratulations, kids. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Next, we're going to talk to Walter Salles and his film, I'm Still Here from Brazil. In I'm Still Here, a mother is forced to reinvent herself when her family's life is shattered by an act of arbitrary violence during the tightening grip of a military dictatorship in Brazil in 1971. The film is nominated for Best Picture, Best International Feature, and Fernanda Torres, the amazing Fernanda Torres, is nominated for Best Actress. Let's take a look at I'm Still Here. Walter, for the first 30 minutes of the film, we see so much life. There is music, the camera is roving around, showing us so much life. We could almost taste the food. Is so rich. And then 30 minutes in, you shut all of that down. You know, tell us about the importance of those first 30 minutes of your film.
Well, first of all, so honored to be here to see a room full of people to hear about cinema. So thank you. The whole film is about memory, the reconstruction of the memory of that family that I happen to know on a personal basis of as friends with the mid sister in this family of 5 kids, mother and father. And the first 30 minutes are pretty much the translation of my memory of that space in this house that I've been as an adolescent, you know. And I was enamored by that house. I was enamored by the light in that house. I was enamored by the humanity between the different groups of people that mingled in that space. And I was enamored by the fact that for that family to live with that intensity was a form of resistance during a military regime. And what you see in this clip is exactly the moment where that light, that possibility to actually enjoy music, discuss politics, do everything, all of that is robbed when the father is taken away. So for me, the film was a lot about that light that is robbed at that very moment. At the same time, it was also about the future of a country that was being robbed at the same time. And you talked about how the light is subtracted at that moment. I think that everything is defined by subtraction from that moment on. Subtraction of light, subtraction of sounds because they are now muffled as the house is invaded by the military police. Subtraction of dialogue because that is also something that an authoritarian regime has affects its dialogue because you can't express yourself freely, you know. So the the film is really the possibility to build the memory of something that we haven't discussed enough in Brazil. It was the possibility to offer a reflection of that time, but also a reflection of that humanity of those characters. And more than anything else, when there's a loss, it's about how you could overcome loss. This is what made me do the film at the end of the day, is this woman that you see in this clip, so fragile, you know, so actually at the mercy, apparently, of those men who invaded her house. This woman will have a journey that she is herself unaware of. And that for me is so extraordinarily life affirming and so beautiful to watch, that somebody, just this one woman, can actually confront a whole authoritarian state, you know. And so
There's so much I want to ask you to what you just said, but I'm going to start by your choice of 35 millimeter shooting. There is so much texture and richness to it's in particular the first 30 minutes of the film. Tell us about the importance of that choice.
yeah, I think that everything here for me were the question of authenticity. And, you know, I couldn't betray that family that I knew, you know. And this is why also it took us 7 years to do the film, because we did so much research on the period, on the family, on the human geography of the 70s, 80s, and 90s in Rio de Janeiro, on the culture itself, you know.
The music.
And the music. Man, the 70s were an age where we were defined by the music we heard. Yeah? If we listen to what's going on, which is not in the film, but I'm drifting. So Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, it's against the war in Vietnam. How wonderful is that, you know? So every single song that you hear in the film has to do with, I would say, the climate of the period.
You also focus on the architecture, which I don't recall a film that like lingers into the architecture.
You know, the house for me was really a character of the film. And this is why at the very end you say goodbye to that house also during the credits, you know. And the 35 are really a way to, as you say, add the grain without having to put artificial grain. And the 35 and the Super 8 are per se memory. You know, when you embrace that, you embrace at the same time the possibility to offer a reflection of that specific time without having to add anything that isn't organic. there's something that happens also when you're shooting in 35 is that you know you're going to do very few takes. So the whole crew is incredibly concentrated. At the same time, interestingly, conversely, the actors are very relaxed because they know they won't have to do that 100 times. So they give it the best. And Kieslowski used to do that. He just did one take with each actor, for each scene of the film. And I don't try to do that, but I do try to make it as alive as possible. The film is shot chronologically also, which helps a lot with children. When you shoot with children, the first thing that you have to do is offer just what they're going to do, the screenplay for that specific day. And we actually rehearsed the film prior to the shoot by writing scenes that would precede the beginning of the film. So you talked about texture for the 35, but there's texture for the family as well. You have to create the texture of that family before the film starts.
Right. So
You
we
know?
understand the loss.
Yes. And what I try to do during the film is to make every single take a take one. If I had to do a take two or a take three, I altered something in a line, or I eliminated dialogue, I added dialogue by speaking to just one person. So
You
that
d-
you would add something that you said, which is imperfection. You have to create something that is unexpected so that the shoot itself becomes an act of discovery, and you have a sense of immediacy, as if it's not acting, as if something is truly happening in front of your very eyes.
No close-ups. Why would you choose not to have any close-ups in your film?
Because, in fact, there are two close-ups in the film, only two close-ups. The close-up when, at the end of the scene, when Rubens goes away, when the father goes away, and the mother realizes that she's going to become father and a mother of that family of 5 kids. That's the first close-up of the film. And I saved the second close-up for the moment where the older Eunice, her name, that Fernanda Torres plays, while her mother, the great Fernanda Montenegro, she comes out of the abyss of Alzheimer to see the husband on the television on a news program, and that's the second close-up. Cinema is a lot about what you elect to be part of the narrative, and what you elect not to be part of the narrative is as important as. And those for me were the two most important parts of what I was telling, and this is why I saved the two close-ups for that. And the second reason is that the material was the loss was so tragic that I didn't have the right to do close-ups or enhance the tragedy. I would be betraying the real-life Eunice, because she refused to be portrayed as a victim, always refused to be portrayed as a victim, always refused to be seen crying. She articulated the idea of smiling as opposed to crying. Therefore, she refused melodrama. If I was to embrace the melodrama and push in the camera and give close-ups all the time, I would be betraying her. And so the best way was to see it from a distance in order to invite the spectator to actually complete what was being told. Trust the spectator, I think that's the...
Your previous films, Foreign Land and Central Station, deal with the color government. You had not dealt with the dictatorship of the 1970s. I don't recall another filmmaker dealing with the dictatorship of the 1970s. What took so long? And can you tell us about that aspect?
Yeah. You know, I come from a country where we lived 21 years of the longest dictatorship in Latin America. And those were 21 years of silence in culture. You know, you could do certain films, but you couldn't do most of the films you'd like to do, you know? And then more recently, when the extreme right rose in Brazil, there were 4 more years of silence. And so our school of cinema, or the way we do cinema, is very much, I would say, defined by those moments where we can or we can't do, you know. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do the film is that I think that there are not enough reflections of that era. And I started doing the film trying to offer that reflection, but everything changed so rapidly during those 7 years where I was preparing the film that I realized, but we all realized that the film was not about our past, it was truly about our present. And that really helped to, I think, put us all, those who were the actors and the crew, in the same vein, in the same artery of the film. You know, we were doing the same film because we realized it was urgent.
In the film, we have Eunice championing this cause, and then eventually the children take up the torch. And then you have the opening dinner, I mean, meal that is mirror in the final meal, and there is a sense of transmission that happens from the older generation carrying the torch of the newer generation. But I get emotional watching your film because you do a different level of transmission as well, where you have Fernanda Torres and Fernanda Montenegro. It's so rich and meta. You know, can you tell us about that aspect? And have you thought about the different levels of transmission that your film does?
You know, the film is born out of transmission because the film is based on the book written by the youngest kid of the family, Marcelo Rubens Paiva. And he wrote it as he realized that his mother, who had fought for memory, the memory of her family for her whole life, was losing memory. And this is why he made that gesture, which is by itself a gesture of transmission. He offered to reconstruct that memory in a book called I'm Still Here. And at the same time, he was offering a reflection of the country during those 30 years. And I think that the film had to pay a tribute to that. But on a personal standpoint, I'm enamored by films about the passage of time. By Ettore Scola, for instance, We Loved Each Other So Much.
Yeah.
And I love the moments, the collective moments in cinema are perfect to do that. Like a dinner scene that reflects on a dinner scene 30 years later. But it wasn't in the screenplay because the first scene where they're all eating together is an improv.
Wow.
And when that improv was so beautiful, we wrote the last improv. Because before it was only the television, and I think so. It's interesting how you know what you don't expect, but what you create on the spot brings life into a picture, you know, and allow you to talk about, yes, the impermanence, the aging of the characters, but also what is relayed, the best of us that is relayed from generation to generation. And it's not by accident that it's Marcelo at the end of the film who says, smile, you know? So it's, for me, it's very important for a film to finish with some form of generosity and belief that we can overcome. And in sometimes we live moments where we think we can't overcome, but there's something that can come from the best that we have, best that we have in an inner, in our inner selves. And yes, we can overcome. So that that is what the film embraces at the very end. We can overcome.
Well, thank you, Walter. Amazing. Next, we have The Seed of the Sacred Fig, directed by the great Mohammad Rasulov. The film deals with investigating Judge Iman grapples with paranoia amid political unrest in Tehran when his gun vanishes. He suspects his wife and daughters imposing draconian measures that strain family ties as society rules crumble. Now, Mohammad Rasulov made this movie in secret and was subsequently sentenced to imprisonment and flogging shortly before its premiere in Cannes this past year. He managed to flee the country. The film is highly critical of Iranian censorship, incorporating social media footage from protests around the country. And the film was ultimately submitted by Germany, where Mohammed lives in exile currently. Let's take a look at The Seed of the Sacred Fig. Mohammed, I mentioned that I've seen all of your films. I'm a big fan. Your previous films were far more metaphorical. This film is a departure for you, is far more realistic. Can you tell us the importance of that change into more realistic filmmaking?
سلام خیلی خوشحالم اینجا هستم حقیقتش این برمیگرده به یه موضوع شخصی وقتی که شما توی سیستم استبدادی زندگی میکنید و سیستم سیاسی میخواد تو خصوصی ترین شکل زندگی شما تو خصوصی ترین اجزای زندگی شما مداخله کنه خود بودن یه چالش بزرگه یه جنگ بزرگه
Hello, I'm very happy to be here. The answer goes back to a personal issue. When you live in a system of repression and dictatorship, and that system is constantly controlling every private aspect of your life, then being yourself becomes a challenge.
من موقعی که کارم رو شروع کردم فکر میکردم چجوری میتونم حیاتم رو توی سینما زندگیمو توی سینما شروع کنم و زیر فشار سانسور و سرکوب بتونم ادامه بدم بنابراین اولین ایده‌ای که بر اساس سنت حتی کهن ادبیات در ایران بود این بود که به زبان استعاره رجوع کنم
When I started making films, the first question I had was how to maintain my sense of self despite the repression and censorship. And the first resort I had for that was to go to the language of metaphor, also based on Persian literature.
ولی بعد از سومین فیلمم یهو متوجه شدم که این زبان استعاره بر من چون از روی ترس داره اتفاق میفته از اینکه نمیخوام به چالش‌های اساسی با سیستم امنیتی و سانسور و اینا برخورد کنم ولی خودش یه قسمتی از سانسور انگار یعنی انگار من خودم دارم خودم رو دستکاری میکنم بعد از سومین فیلم
After my third film, I realized that that metaphorical language is itself a form of censorship. And it is as if it's coming out of a way of censoring self. So I realized that I no longer want to get to that.
این برخلاف سنت زیبایی شناسی هست که حتی تو کشور من جاریه برای اینکه این یه گفتن داستانهای خیلی مستقیم از نظر اون زیبایی شناسی که توی یه سیستم استبدادی شکل میگیره همیشه بی‌ارزش به نظر میرسه
This is against the aesthetic currents that are prevalent in my country, because those currents are always resorting to metaphorical language, and saying stories the way they are is a form against aesthetics.
ولی من تصمیم گرفتم که تا اونجایی که میتونم سانسور رو ندیده بگیرم، داستانا رو مستقیم بگم و این برام این معنا رو داشت که به خودم نزدیکتر میشم.
But I made a conscious choice to tell stories the way stories were, and to let go of metaphors and therefore let go of censorship. This allowed me to become closer to myself.
و کم کم این احساس رو پیدا کردم که الان میتونم وسط داستانایی که مستقیم دارم تعریف میکنم لایه های استعاری هم داشته باشم که از روی ترس نیست.
Gradually, I got the sense that as I'm telling stories the way they are, I can also have layers that are coming out of metaphors, but they're not metaphors out of a sense of fear or hiding.
شکلی که من فیلم میسازم تقریبا میشه گفت یه فیلمسازی اضطراریه، یعنی انتخاب خیلی درش نقش نداره، تو باید ببینی چی داری، با اون چیزی که داری چی کار میتونی بکنی.
The way I make films, you can say, is an urgent form of filmmaking. There is not a lot of choices that I could be having, but I have to be choosing from what I have.
Thank you. You had a lot of restrictions making this film, limitations imposed on you. You couldn't be with your actors directly. You live stream as you were directing. My question to you is, did you find that these limitations gave you a form of freedom to find new ways of expression?
فکر میکنم که به مرور تو همه فیلمام این اتفاق افتاد و تو این آخری از همه سخت‌تر بود.
I believe that gradually this did happen in all of my films, and in my last film it was happening. It was most difficult.
فکر میکنم این محدودیت از مرحله فیلمنامه بود. تو میخوای یه داستان تعریف کنی ولی میدونی که نمیتونی خیلی چیزا رو انجام بدی. چجوری میتونی داستانتو تعریف کنی ولی توی فیلم خیلی معلوم نباشه که تو خیلی با محدودیت فیلم ساختی؟
I think the limitations started from the stage of writing the screenplay. I had to write it in a way that allowed me to overcome the limitations, but I didn't want those limitations to be very clear in the script.
بدون اینکه بخوام محدودیت رو ستایش کنم، سانسور رو ستایش کنم، باید بگم تو چاره‌ای نداری جز اینکه محدودیت رو تبدیل کنی به یه راه حل.
Without wanting to glorify limitations and censorship, I had to pick a way that allowed me to turn those limitations into solutions.
من یه آپارتمان برای این فیلم داشتم که تنها جایی بود که میتونستم توش کار کنم. هیچ جایی دیگه نمیتونستم.
I had one apartment for the film, which was the only place I could work at. There was not a single other place where I could work.
بنابراین نهایت انعطاف رو باید نشون میدادم و برای دکوپاژم خودم رو توی اون فضای تنگ میگنجوندم هر جور شده.
So I had to be most flexible for the set design to bring myself out of that very limited space I had.
بنابراین محدودیت به همون اندازه که یک دشواریه خودش آدرس یه راه حلم هست.
So as much as those limitations are challenges and difficulties, they are also directing you to solutions.
In my book, in the heart of the film, the dinner scene where there's a big confrontation, we see this conflict between enlightenment and ignorance, where enlightenment, because you're not going to submit to previous ideas. And then you have the representation of ignorance where people are going to go on with the previous ideas and regimes. Can you tell us about how you arrive to that powerful dinner scene confrontation?
خب داستان از توی یه تجربه من از تو زندان شروع شد، وقتی که جنبش زن زندگی آزادی تو ایران تو سطح خیلی بالایی بود. یه ملاقات اتفاقی بین من و یکی از مسئولین زندان پیش اومد و اون به من گفت که از خودش نفرت داره، به من گفت که به کشتن خودش فکر میکنه و بعد به من گفت که بچه‌هاش خیلی اونو تحت فشار گذاشتن که این چه وضعیه که تو زندان کار میکنی، با یه سیستمی که مردم رو سرکوب میکنه کار میکنی. این اولین نقطه ای بود که من به داستانی فکر کردم که درش یه شکافی وجود داره بین پدر و مادر و بچه ها و انگار این یه شکاف یه آدرس تاریخی هم داشت، یه زمینه تاریخی هم داشت، مقابله سنت و مدرنیته.
Well, this story began from my personal experience in prison when I met one of the prison officials who told me that he hates himself, that he's very angry at himself, and he's constantly thinking about suicide. And he's under a lot of pressure by his family and especially by his children who question his involvement in the regime and his job. And that was the moment I thought telling the story about a family in which there's a deep chasm between the two generations is very important to me. And this story and this chasm, there also has a historical reference to what has happened in Iran between tradition and modernity.
من فکر میکنم نسل جدید در ایران دوست داره با یه نگاه امروزی زندگی کنه، ولی یک گروه از کسانی که در واقع تو قدرت هستن، یک گروه از یک نگاه اقلیتن که به سنت خیلی وابستن و بهش میخوان خیلی وفادار باشن، خیلی تسلیمش باشن.
I believe the new generation in Iran has its look in the world and wants to have a modern approach to its life. But the power structures and the groups that are now controlling the government are a minority that has its eye on the traditions and are trying to stay devoted to traditions.
There is another beautiful scene where the buckshot, the buckshots are being removed from the young woman's face, and the mother faces the mirror and she washes the blood, and then later on you use that mirror for the father and the mother to make decisions that I don't want to spoil. Can you tell? And we hear this beautiful Kurdish lullaby. Can you tell us about that scene?
آره، اون آینه بر من یه معنی داشت، انگار که این آدما که توی سیستم کار میکنن، حتی با وجود اینکه میتونن جنبه‌های انسانی داشته باشن، ولی انتخاب کردن که در واقع یه قسمتی از ماشین جنایت و سرکوب باشن. اونا انتخاب میکنن، اونا به خودشون آگاهن. اینطور نیست که ندونن دارن چی کار میکنن. تصمیم گرفتن که قسمتی از این ماشین باشن.
Yes, that mirror had meaning to me. And it was signifying the fact that these people who choose to be part of this system, even though they do have human attributes and characteristics, they still decide to be part of the apparatus of repression and censorship. It's not that they're ignorant of it, it's a conscious choice that they make.
این بر من یه معنی دیگه هم داره. احساس میکنم در خیلی از موارد این اتفاق میفته که آدم ها فکر میکنن دارن عقایدشون رو دنبال میکنن، ولی دارن منافعشون رو دنبال میکنن.
This has another layer of meaning to it for me. And that is a lot of times when people think they're following their beliefs, they're actually following their benefits.
Amazing. The third half of the film, you change your cinematic language. You go to a metaphorical level. We go to ruins, and you put the characters in this ruins of Iran. Can you tell us about the importance of that?
واقعیت اینه که همونطور که گفتم واقعا انتخابا بر من زیاد نبود. من مجبور بودم داستانی که انتخاب کردم با اون همه محدودیت تعریف کنم. بنابراین وقتی که رسیدم به اینجای داستان موقع نوشتن واقعا تقریبا میشه گفت زدم تو سر خودم، گفتم الان منتقدا پدر منو در میارن که تو اصلا سینما بلد نیستی، از تو ژانر نمیشناسی، نتونستی فرم سینمایی تو حفظ کنی و این خیلی منو وایسون متوقف کرد.
To be honest, as I said, I really didn't have a lot of choices. I had to tell a story with a lot of limitations. And when I reached that point in the story, I just hit myself in the head. And I thought, what am I going to do with the critics? They're going to be very angry at me. They're going to think that I don't know cinema. They're going to think that I don't know genre and that I'm going in and out between the two genres.
بعد یهو به خودم گفتم که ببین تو این همه برای آزادی‌های اجتماعی و سیاسی داری دست و پا میزنی، زندان میری، هزینه میدی، همه کاری میکنی، آزادی‌های هنری چی؟
But then I said to myself, you have been paying the price for your social and political freedom. You have been going to jail. You have been making so many devotions to that. But then what about your artistic freedom?
اونجا بود که فکر کردم که باید هر کاری که دلم میخواد بکنم.
And that's the point I thought I need to do what I want to do.
یه چیز دیگه هم وجود داشت، واقعا فکر میکردم این فیلم هیچ وقت تموم نمیشه. بنابراین هر روز صبح که فیلم برداری شروع میشد میزدم رو شونه خودم، میگفتم برو حال کن، مثلا به بعدش فکر نکن، ادامه بده.
And there was another factor involved, and that was the fact that I never thought I would actually finish the film. Every day we went to shooting, I would pat myself in the shoulder and I would tell myself, just go and enjoy it. Don't think about finishing.
You do incorporate, when I introduce your film, I mentioned that you do incorporate footage, actual footage of the Women Live Freedom Uprising. Can you tell us about how that footage came about and the importance, the urgency of incorporating that footage into your film?
خب همونطور که گفتم موقعی که جنبش شروع شد من توی زندان بودم و خیلی کنجکاو بودم بیرون تو خیابون چه اتفاقی افتاده و وقتی که بیرون اومدم اولین کاری که کردم رفتم ویدیوهایی که خود معترضین در غیاب روزنامه‌نگارا و خبرنگارا خودشون گرفته بودن و از طریق شبکه‌های اجتماعی هم رسانی کرده بودن و تماشا کردم.
When the Women Life Freedom movement happened, I was in jail and I was very curious about what had happened on the streets. So the minute I got out, I went and watched as many of the videos as I could, those videos that were taken by the protesters themselves and they had been shared with the world.
این ویدیو عمیقاً رو من تاثیر گذاشت، خیلی تکونم داد. با این حال شروع کردم به نوشتن داستان و فکر کردم دارم داستان خب یه خانواده‌ای رو می‌نویسم که تو خونه خودشون گیر افتادن به خاطر اون چیزی که بیرون خونه داره اتفاق میفته. حالا من چجوری میخوام در حالی که دارم یواشکی یه فیلم میسازم بیرون خونه رو نشون بدم؟ مثلا امکان نداره بتونم بازسازی کنم.
Those videos really left an influence on me. They shook me. And I was thinking about how to write the story about a family that was trapped in its own house. I wanted to reconstruct what was happening outside with the protests, and I realized there is no way I could be making those scenes, remaking those scenes in the outside world.
اینجا بود که فکر کردم که میتونم برم توی تصویرهای واقعی، تو اصوات واقعی، چون صوتام واقعیه، اون چیزایی که توی صحنه‌هایی که صدا میشنویم اونها هم واقعی است.
And that's when I realized I could go back to the real images and real sounds. The sounds are also real, and what we hear is both captured in sound and in image by protesters.
ولی دو تا دلیل مهم دیگه هم داشت. یکی این که رفتن تو این تصاویر نشون میداد که شبکه‌های اجتماعی چقدر نقش مهمی توی جنبش نسل جدید توی ایران داشت.
There were two other important reasons. One was that using these images just showed how important a role social media played in the lives of Iranian people in the protests.
و در این حال من با خودم فکر میکردم بیا فرض کن که مثلا اصلا اجازه داشتی این صحنه‌ها رو بازسازی کنی یا حتی میتونستی یه جوری این کار رو بکنی. آیا میتونی اون قدرت واقعیت رو بازسازی کنی؟ و واقعا احساس کردم برای یه همچی کاری خیلی خیلی ناتوانم.
And then I thought to myself, suppose that you did have the permission to reconstruct those protest scenes. Are you even able to reconstruct them with the same power that they have in the images that have been captured in real footage? And I realized that I really don't have that ability to reconstruct the whole thing.
Well, thank you, Mohammed. Not only are you an amazing filmmaker, but the fact that you teach us that we need to fight for freedom of speech and freedom of art as well. Thank you very much. Next is, speaking of great filmmakers, Jacques Audiard and Emilia Perez. Emilia Perez follows three remarkable women in Mexico, each pursuing their own happiness. Cartel leader Emilia enlists unappreciated lawyer Rita to help fake her death so she can finally live authentically as her true self. The film is nominated not just for Best International Feature, but is also nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Actress in the Leading Role, Actress in a Supporting Role, Adapted Screenplay, Makeup, Original Score, Cinematography, Film Editing, twice in Original Song, Best Editing and Best Sound. Please, let's take a look at Emilia Perez. Jacques, recently here in Santa Barbara, we did a retrospective of your work, and I got to see all of your films. And it struck me that music, opera, has played an integral role in your films all throughout. In the beat that my heart skips. Music becomes a form of language, of communicating with characters. In Rust and Bone, you use Baby You're a Firework, the Katy Perry song, in an operatic moment. In A Prophet, you use Kurt Weill at the end of the movie. Can you tell us about the role that music has played in your storytelling that led to Emilia Perez?
D'abord, merci infiniment. Merci, mes chers confrères. Vous écouter est un plaisir.
First of all, thank you very much. And thank you, dear colleagues. To listen to you is truly a pleasure.
Il s'est dit quand même des choses très intelligentes.
Some very intelligent things have been said up here.
Non, sans blague, hein, franchement.
Really, I'm not kidding.
J'ai pris des notes.
I took notes.
Alors, la musique, oui, ben, tu as tout à fait raison. Mais la synthèse que tu fais, là, je me la suis faite, et ça te paraît évident. Moi, je me la suis faite très récemment.
Well, you're right about music, but the synthesis that you just came up with, this analysis, seems very obvious to you, but it only came to me very recently.
C'est incroyable parce que moi, le seul souvenir que j'avais de réelle formulation de musique et d'opéra, c'était dans mon deuxième film, Self-Made Hero, où j'avais pensé en faire un petit opéra avec Alexandre Desplat, un petit format à la méthode, à la manière de Brecht et Weill.
It's incredible because the only memory I actually have of really articulating music and opera in my work was for my second feature, A Self-Made Hero. At that time, I had thought of making a little opera based on that film with the composer Alexandre Desplat that would have been in the Brecht-Weill style.
Alors, il y a eu il y a eu cette chose-là, puis il y a une évolution que je suis quand même obligé, mais je suis complètement idiot, hein, moi, quand je fais des films. Non, non, mais c'est vrai. Tu peux le traduire, ça va mettre le public.
Okay, so there was that, and then there was an evolution. And I really have to say, I'm such an idiot when I make films.
Et que comment et qu'en fait je fais un film véritablement sur la musique, de battre mon cœur s'est arrêté, avec cette donnée supplémentaire qui apparaît sans que je m'en aperçoive, c'est que deux personnes vont parler sans se comprendre.
So, I made I made a film that was entirely about music, the beat that my heart skipped, with this additional thing that two characters would talk to each other without understanding each other.
Je vais à partir de là, sans m'en apercevoir encore, commencer à faire des films dans des langues que je ne parle pas et ne comprends pas.
And from that point on, I started, again without realizing myself, making films in languages that I don't speak and don't understand.
On pourrait attribuer ça à mon masochisme naturel.
One could attribute that to my natural masochism.
Mais en fait, ce qui commence à m'attirer à partir d'un prophète avec l'arabe, et après Dipan avec le tamoul, avec le tamil, c'est la musicalité des langues. Je me désintéresse un peu sur le plateau du sens. Ce sont des musiques que je traite, c'est du chant.
And my
But
follow.
can I just
sorry.
try?
Yeah.
But actually, what started to attract me, starting with a prophet with Arabic and Deepan with Tamil, was the musicality of languages. On set, I started to lose interest in the actual meaning and become drawn to the music and the song of the dialogue.
And my question is that do you find that all of this searching is about finding a way to find a new language in cinema to express yourself?
Oui, oui, sans doute.
Yes, probably.
Oui, sans doute. Si je suis tout à fait honnête, ça va peut-être. Je suis plus un littéraire qu'un cinéphile. Je peux me passer éventuellement des images, mais je ne peux pas me passer de littérature, de mots, de musique.
Probably. If I'm totally honest with you, I'm more of a literary fellow than a cinephile. I can do without images, but I can't do without literature, without words.
Et que après, je pourrais ajouter aussi que je suis comment un pur produit en tant que cinéphile, pardon si je me contredis. Moi, je suis un pur produit du cinéma muet. Moi, j'ai toujours la nostalgie du muet. J'ai la nostalgie de ces images qui n'ont pas de sens, sauf ce qu'on écrit sur les petits cartons. Mais c'est juste du jeu et de la lumière. Et en fait, pour moi, voilà, c'est ça. C'est peut-être ça je réponds à peu près n'importe quoi là où.
Ça va.
Ça va.
I could add that, and I'm sorry if I'm going to contradict myself here, but as a cinephile, I am a pure product of silent film. I have this nostalgia for silent film, images that, in a sense, have no meaning other than the intertitles, the cards, and that are just purely acting and light.
Ce que je veux dire, c'est que je m'échappe du dialogue parlé. Que je vais tout comprendre, je vais tout dire, je vais tout comprendre. J'essaie d'échapper à ça.
What I mean is that I try to escape from spoken dialogue, this idea that we're going to say everything through words and understand everything through words. I try to escape from that.
You do also something that is so unique to you and breathtaking is the fact that all of your characters in your film undergo change, and your film mimics that change or underlines that change by switching genres. So, for example, Emilia Perez, all the characters, the lawyer undergoes a change, Amelia undergoes a change, and you take us through a drug trafficking film to to a telenovela to a musical. You keep shifting genres the way that the characters are evolving. Can you tell it? And you've done this in all of your films. In Rust and Bone, she goes through a physical transformation, and the film undergoes a genre shift as well. Can you tell us about that?
C'est drôle.
It's funny.
Alors non, parce que je trouve que c'est très fin comme c'est très subtil. J'aurais pas dit ça de Rust and Bone, mais tu as raison, bien sûr.
That's a very clever analysis. I wouldn't have said that about Rust and Bone, but you're absolutely right.
Je suis un peu crétin, je t'ai dit. Hein.
I told you I'm kind of a fool.
No, you're a very talented filmmaker who's being humble.
Alors, je crois que je peux. D'abord, effectivement, tu as raison. Et je crois qu'il y a une chose qui est assez présente dans les scénarios que j'écris, c'est ce thème de la deuxième vie, ou plutôt la question à combien de vies a-t-on le droit? On a droit à une vie, c'est celle qu'on vit, voilà, on en connaît le prix. Mais si on veut changer de vie, ça va coûter combien? Ça va être quel sacrifice pour quel gain?
We're giving a life.
Of course, you're right. There's one thing that's present in all the screenplays I write, which is the theme of the second life, or rather, this question: how many lives am I allowed to live? We all know what the first life is. That's the one that we're living right now. But what about a second life? And what will we have to sacrifice to benefit from that second life?
Par exemple, tu me révèles une chose, c'est que Marion Cotillard, elle devra perdre ses jambes.
For example, you've just revealed something to me. It's that Marion Cotillard will have to lose her legs for that second life.
Emilia devra laisser ses enfants, abandonner ses enfants pendant un moment.
In Emilia Perez, it's that Emilia will have to leave her children behind for a time.
Ça, c'est le prix à payer.
That's the cost. That's the price to pay.
And then where does the shifting of the genres that is highly entertaining, not just on the surface level, but from a cinephile to watch you nimbly navigate different genres and masterfully in Emilia Perez, how does that tie to that second life?
Ça a un rapport parce que ça va permettre un changement de forme déjà.
Oui.
Je vais passer si tu parles d'Emilia, Emilia est narco, et tout à coup elle va devenir une espèce de grande bourgeoise. Tu vois, c'est quand même très très différent. Et là le film, la forme du film, quand on va faire des mauvais jeux de mots, il faut pas trop en faire, mais sur le genre du film noir, narco, tout ça va se transformer en autre chose.
So the way it ties to it is, you're talking about Emilia Perez, there she's going to change from a narco boss, a cartel leader, to a extremely rich bourgeois woman. That's a very different thing. And the form of the film is going to follow that. We're going to go from, a noir genre into something else.
Wow. You also do something remarkable, Emilia Perez, in the mise en scène, is the way you shoot musical numbers very operatically with the lighting design in darkness and the spotlight on characters. Can you tell us about your approach to the musical numbers?
Comment j'ai approché ça? Je crois d'abord, c'est un assez gros travail technique pour moi, parce que moi, j'ai pas du tout. C'est la première fois que je faisais un film avec du chant, de la musique, de la danse, tout ça. Et donc, j'ai abordé ça de manière très très empirique. On faisait ça au jour le jour, comme ça, et puis on voyait à quoi ça ressemblait. Mais une chose m'est revenue, et ça rejoint peut-être. C'est que je crois que tous les gros numéros musicaux sont finalement assez simples Ils sont très simplifiés. Je me suis rappelé d'une chose parce qu'on me posait la question, je crois que c'était hier ou avant-hier, combien il y avait de caméras sur le premier numéro dansé, El Alligato. Il y avait 2 caméras. Je me souviens, il y avait vraiment 2 caméras. Il y en avait une qui était sur Zoé, qui accompagnait Zoé, et puis une autre comme ça. J'ai dit, bon, c'est une espèce de truc qui faisait des plans en latéral. Et ben, pas une image de la deuxième caméra n'a été montée. Ça n'a servi strictement à rien. La seule chose qui était intéressante, c'était de voir Zoé évoluer dans le marché.
Well, first of all, it represented a tremendous technical effort on my part because it was the first time I was doing a film that involved song, music, dance. So, I approached it very empirically, day by day, and then we would see what it looked like and take it from there. But something came back to me recently and leads me to believe that actually all the musical numbers in Amelia Perez are relatively simple. I remembered this because I was asked the other day how many cameras I had used for the first musical number, El Alligato. And I answered, because it was true, that we used 2 cameras. There was one on Zoe, and the other one was from the side, moving around. And the fact is that we didn't use a single image from that B camera in the movie. It was completely useless. It served no purpose. And so what that goes to show is that the focus, what was really interesting, was to see Zoe moving through that market.
Which leads me to the next question about one of the other things I admire about your experimentation in film. In the Prophet, you started exploring the depth of field, the foreground, midground, and background, and you take it to the max in Amelia Perez. Can you tell us about that approach?
Ben, c'est marrant que tu fasses le rapprochement avec un prophète, parce qu'un prophète m'a appris beaucoup de choses. Il m'a appris comment, ça peut paraître idiot hein, quand on a, je sais pas, 50 ans, d'apprendre ce que c'est que la profondeur de champ. Mais moi, j'ai appris sur un prophète. En fait, l'idée, c'est de mettre en scène d'abord le fond, ce qui est la vie en gros, et de faire et après on met comment les acteurs, la mise en place se fera par rapport à ça. Et comme dans Emilia Pérez, il y avait bien sûr la question était posée puisque je tournais en studio. C'était de ça et que j'avais pas une profondeur considérable. Ça devait faire même pas la taille de cette salle, enfin mon plateau. Et donc j'ai compris très très vite qu'il fallait traiter ça par la chorégraphie, par les corps. Alors c'est un mauvais jeu de mots, les décors, les corps des danseurs, décors font décor. Voilà, mais qui comprendra qui veut. Et c'était en fait toute la chorégraphie me servait de fond. Voilà, comme ça je ne tapais pas je ne luttais pas contre le décor. C'est très prosaïque hein, mes réponses. Moi, j'aurais bien aimé parler de la métaphore comme autocensure.
It's funny that you connect this with a prophet because a prophet really taught me a lot. It may seem kind of dumb to have learned what depth of field really meant around the age of 50, but that's what a prophet did for me. And what I understood is that you have to do the mise en scène of the background, which is life, first, and then you set up the actors based on that. And so in Amelia Perez, this question obviously came up because I was shooting on a soundstage and I didn't have a lot of depth. We didn't even have as much as this room here. And so what I quickly understood is that I was going to have to use the choreography and the bodies to deal with that question of depth of field. And so then there's a untranslatable pun in French, which is il fallait utiliser décor pour faire décor. We needed to use bodies to create a set. Décor, bodies, décor, set. And so the entire choreography served as the background and allowed me, therefore, to not have to fight against the set? You know, my answers are very prosaic. I would have loved to talk about metaphor as self-censorship.
J'aimerais, tu sais comment, il y a une chose, j'ai presque honte de parler de tous mes problèmes de riche à Mohamed, parce que comme tout à l'heure, il nous disait que lui, la question qui lui était posée, c'est une question de surface en mètres carrés, de lumière. Là, moi, je disais, oui, un truc comme ça. Non, on est vraiment dans des mondes différents, je m'en excuse, Mohamed.
You know, I'm really kind of ashamed to talk about my first world rich guy problems when Mohammed here has just talked about his issue being how much light for a square foot, what he had to deal with as a surface, you know, whereas I'm here like, and our depth was just, you know, not quite this theater. We're really in different worlds, and I apologize to you, Mohammed.
Yeah, it's so sweet. This, I, blah, I'm out of words. This has been so amazing, guys. I want to open it up to a discussion, but I had to spend quality time with each of you. So I apologize that I will shortchange a conversation amongst them all. But I will ask something that Jacques led me to is the fact that each of you, your stories, your worlds are so specific. And are you in your, while making this film, your films, are you guys thinking about the global, you know, how the world is going to receive your very specific story? Gins?
I think I just try to make something personal. If you try to please everyone, if you try to make something global, like it'll become so bland and basically for no one. And I think if you just make it for one person, it can actually reach something more global and universal.
And Walter, your film is so specific to Brazil, but I couldn't help to think about our current situation here in the U.S. and the T word. Um, um, is that, I mean, you were making your film for your specific audience, but the fact that it has this global impact.
You know, we made the film because we thought it needed to be made, you know, and that united us all in front of the camera and behind of the camera. And we never thought really that the question never arose, will that echo? No, it just felt necessary, you know, and and we had the intuition that it had to be shared collectively in cinemas. So the whole film was meant in the way it was financed, you know, by small distributors everywhere, so that it could be shared collectively as it is right now. And it's kind of a miracle to think that the less you foresee what you want the film to do, you know, on a commercial standpoint or whatever, the more it can find, you know, an echo in your country and outside. We were in Brazil. You know, we had a double pandemic. We had the COVID pandemic without the vaccines because of the extreme right government, and then and on top of that, we had the fact that you know, all the subsidies for culture were cut, so nobody was going back to cinemas. And we didn't know if the people would go back to cinemas. And they did. So many people went from different generations to see the reflection of themselves on the screen. I think this is what nurtures us all here, is to all the projects here, to try to give a sense of who we were at a different time and share it collectively.
But
You
what
know?
to me is remarkable is that the Oscars has been so US centric, and to see Emilia Perez recognized all across the board with other Hollywood films, to see your film included in best. I mean, I just I just see that there's this major shift happening where we don't need to have a best international feature. We should celebrate cinema at large. Go ahead. Go.
Should I? Okay. No, what really makes this year unique is that in watching Mohammed's films, watching every single film here, I understood much better what the world was about. This is what unites all the films here. I saw that in documentaries this year. And I believe that we have to pay tribute to the fact that the Academy itself is now represented worldwide much more than before, and pay tribute to Bong Joon-ho, who did something that was incredible. That Parasite could open the doors to the fact that foreign films from different countries could be acknowledged and embraced, and Alfonso Cuarón with Roma did that. And these are incredible filmmakers, and films are grávidos. How do we say that in English? Pregnant of other films. That's what I always thought. So I'm very honored, to be part of this trend of films that can echo, even if we don't do them to echo.
Well, I do have to wrap up. Unfortunately, I could go on talking to you guys for the rest of the day. You guys are so incredibly talented, and I am so honored to have had you guys here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.